Uh, all right. Hopefully you can see my screen. Today I'm going to be presenting using a PDF rather than my PowerPoint. So let me know you can see that, everybody. You can see me, you can hear me, you can chat in the chat box. Make sure you chat to everybody, not just to the host and panelists. Okay, we've got a lot of people registered for this webinar. It's very exciting. I'm very, very pleased to have been invited by English Score to talk to you today. I think whilst you're all entering the room, I should introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Colm Downs. My dad's Irish, my mum's English. I have an English accent, not an Irish accent, but I don't live in the UK anymore. I live and work in Indonesia. Uh, I've been in Indonesia for a long time. Most of my career has been in English language teaching, and specifically working with the British Council as an English teacher, business English teacher, a legal English teacher. Most recently, I was the director for English Education and Society here in Indonesia, and I was formerly the global lead for climate action in language education. I'm very passionate about English for specific purposes and content and language integrated learning, which links very closely to the content of today's webinar. Now, I have about 90 minutes in total. We will finish before then. We're going to finish a little bit earlier than that, so don't worry. I'm going to be talking quite a lot, but it's going to be an interactive webinar. I'm going to be asking you lots of questions, and I hope that you will comment in the comment box. There will be time for questions at the end. If you have urgent questions as we go, you can put them in the chat box, and if I see them, I'll try to answer them. So really, I want this to be a dialogue. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there with a lot of experience in teaching English and skills, professional skills, communication skills. Also, well, we've got lots of different terminology that we use for skills, and I'd like to hear about your experience too. Okay, let me see. Let me think. Have we covered everything before we begin? I'm going to talk, as I said, for about 50 minutes, and then we'll have the Q&A. You will all get a certificate. I think this webinar is being recorded, and you will get a copy of my slides at the end of this talk. So everything that you see now or you're about to see is a PDF, and you'll get the whole PDF. So you can relax, you can get a coffee, you can get a whatever you're drinking, whatever you want to eat, and we will kick off. Great to see so many people joining us today. Now, how do I progress to the next PDF? I just do it like that. There we go. Slide it down. So I wanted to start off by saying a big thank you to English Score. I've been a consultant for English Score for a number of years now, and I'm incredibly excited by their product, this innovation in assessment, and the fact that it really, for me, what is most exciting about it is that it makes accurate English language assessment affordable and accessible to lots of people. Anybody who has a mobile phone can now find out their level of English. So thanks to English Score, we'll talk a little bit more about English Score maybe towards the end of this talk. This is what I'm going to do today. Okay, it's very simple. I'll keep it very easy. I've got a lot of things to share, but basically, although there are many, many skills we could talk about, I'm going to talk about 5 skills that I think learners need in order to be competitive today. And then I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to do that quite quickly. And then I'm going to give you 5 reasons why I think we need to integrate these skills into our English language teaching. And hopefully I'll be convincing. And then I'm going to give you 5 techniques or methods or ways in which you could integrate these skills into English language teaching. And I'm sure some of these techniques, these methods will be familiar to many of you. Some of these techniques and ideas might be new. And we'll probably spend most of the talk looking at these techniques, these methods. Okay, so it's very easy. And then at the end, we'll have time for a discussion, but you can ask me any questions. All right, so 5 skills. I've got to be quick because I can talk a lot. Okay. What do you think I'm going to say? Let's have a bit of interaction before you see my 5 skills. Let's look in the chat box. What 5 skills might I have decided to highlight in today's webinar? I'm going to see who answers first. What will be skill number 1? What skills do learners need? Critical thinking, is that on my list? Possibly. Let's see if we can get some more. What skills are communication skills, says Tarun. Curiosity, scaffolding. I'm thinking, remember, this is all about soft skills, skills that education leaders and experts uh, in education argue that we need to be equipping our students with in order to succeed in the future. Okay. Now, the first one is a bit of a cheat. So I'm going to be saying, here we go. What skills do learners need? Number 1, we're English teachers, okay? So English language is the number 1 skill. We're all, you won't be surprised, but I wanted to make it very clear at the beginning that our primary job is to teach English and is to improve our students' level of English to get them from a A1 or an A2 to a B2 or a C1, improve all 4 skills. Now, English is it is a skill. It's that transformative skill that unlocks opportunities in further education, in employment, in being able to participate in the global conversation, to be part of global networks, to travel. Okay, you know all of this, all right? But it is also a key and a foundation to many of the other skills. That's why I wanted to highlight it at the beginning, okay? And you'll see I've got some stories about this. One of the throughout my talk, I'll be referencing some resources and some other experts in the field. So this is a particularly good new paper that I recommend you go and have a read of, and it's by Chia. And Chia in this paper, Chia Xuan Chong, right, brilliant expert. She specializes in many areas, including the teaching of communication skills. But she talks about English right at the beginning of this paper, and she says the ability to communicate internationally in English is often an essential requirement for gaining opportunities for career advancement and improved socio-economic status. I like that phrase a lot. And I want us to bear that in mind as we go through my webinar today about how we can tackle inequality and help improve everybody's income, their welfare, and improve their socio-economic status. So English is the key to that, alongside other skills. So quick story. I've told this story before, so I'm going to tell it very quickly. Because you may have been to my webinars previously. While I'm telling this story, quick story, I want you to think of your own story, not necessarily yourself. It might be somebody you know. It could be a friend, could be a family member. So here's the quick story. Ready? This is Maria. Maria is from Indonesia, and she comes from let's say a poor family. Her parents were farmers, okay? They were not very rich at all. She was the first person in her family to go to university, as you can see here over on the left, and she got a scholarship. Fantastic. But the scholarship only covered the fees, right? So her parents, these are teak trees in the background. Her parents had some trees. They cut down some of these teak trees to give her some extra money so that she could survive in Semarang, where she went to study her bachelor's degree. Now, it still wasn't really enough money because Semarang was an expensive city, as a student to survive. But because Maria was very entrepreneurial, She was very good at English. She was quite yeah, she was quite entrepreneurial and very good at English. She went online and she found some opportunities online to earn some extra money. So she started finding jobs. So, for example, she found this website called the Translators Cafe, where people were looking for translators, and she got some pieces of work, and those bits of work helped her make money while she went to university. And then she got another scholarship and came to Jakarta to do her master's. And while she was in Jakarta, an even more expensive city, she found other jobs. So she went to a website called Upwork. And I know that she found work in Jakarta, helping businessmen and women with their meetings. She was an interpreter and she continued to do some translation work. Okay. And then after she graduated, she got a job in Jakarta, a very good job, but she also set up a business selling bags made in Bali online and created a website, and the website's all in English. So she had an international group of clients, customers, and she is very successful. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is for this reason. Oh, that's her shop where she sells products online. The reason I'm telling you this story is because, and here you can read this with me. Maria was fortunate enough to gain scholarships to complete her undergraduate studies and her postgraduate studies. However, this on its own wasn't enough. Maria also independently developed the following key skills. As well as her English language skills, she developed intercultural competence, this ability to connect and build relationships with people from other cultures, maybe other countries. She developed digital literacy skills through using computers and finding opportunities online. She was definitely very entrepreneurial in setting up a business online. And this business required a number of different professional soft skills like negotiating and collaborating, relationship building. So, oh, and at the end, this is maybe the key point of this story. We don't know, or I don't know, how Maria developed these additional skills. She didn't develop these skills at school or at university. She developed them on her own. Now, maybe she inherited them, part of her, she had good genes. Maybe her parents helped her to build these skills. Okay. We all develop our skills in different ways. However, we can, I strongly believe, and lots of people have been writing about, we can teach and help learners to develop these skills at school, at university, in the English language teaching classroom. And to succeed, Maria has succeeded, but not everybody has. Maria has succeeded, but to succeed today in a very challenging environment that we live in, these skills are seen as essential skills, really, in order to be successful. All right, I hope when I've been telling you that story, I hope you've been thinking maybe about yourself, maybe about somebody else, and think about all of the skills that they needed to succeed. English was surely one of the key skills, the foundation skill, but others were important. So we're still talking here about what skills, okay? This was another slide I had to emphasize the fact that English is the foundation, is the key, but that you need more skills in order to be successful these days. And another slide. Okay, so you'll get all of this later. This is reinforcing my point about the need for many skills. So here we go. The second skill that I'm highlighting is, it has lots of different names as well, but I'm going to call it intercultural competence. There's a fantastic article which I'm going to tell you about, which explains all of the different terminology that academics use to talk about this area because there have been many terms. Some people have talked about cross-cultural communication. There's intercultural communicative competence. And recently, there has been a growing use of the phrase transnational competence or transcultural competence. I'll get them mixed up. And intercultural awareness. But what nearly all of these terms broadly relate to, as you can see in my definition here, is the ability to communicate and collaborate effectively across boundaries. Okay. It combines awareness of yourself and awareness of other cultures, other other cultures, and let's. I need to make sure we stick to the timing, so I'll keep going. Adaptability, intercultural communicative competence, helping learners engage respectfully and successfully in diverse contexts. Now, I want to say briefly that I've been very lucky in my life that I've been able to live and work in many countries around the world. And through that experience, I have developed, I think, quite strong intercultural competence. I've had to in order to integrate into new countries. But most people don't have that opportunity. But there's two things. One is that, for example, if I take Indonesia where I live for a moment, Indonesia is an incredibly large and diverse country, and it's a very harmonious country on the whole. So people in Indonesia have developed very good intercultural competence within Indonesia in their ability to live and work and get on with lots of different types of Indonesians. And so I hope that they recognize their intercultural competence on that level. But secondly, and maybe this is a global thing, increasingly more and more jobs in the world of work requires us to work in global teams. So, this is an area where even if you're not going to live or work overseas, your kind of intercultural competence is a key kind of skill these days in order to get a job. I'm jumping ahead into why I realize I need to stick to the skills themselves. Let's keep going just on the skills themselves. I will skip through these bits, but this is extra information from this article that I've mentioned. I might come back to this later if I have time. It's by a guy called Will Baker. So this is a lot more information, and some of the terms that I just mentioned are explained in terms of intercultural communication and its place in English language teaching. Let's come back to that, okay? Number 3, or the third skill that I'll look at the moment, I just want to term them professional communication skills. Things like negotiation skills, collaboration skills, presentation skills. Obviously, some of these skills overlap, okay? All right, number 4. See, this one was quick. We'll come back to these. I'm going to call this digital literacy skills, including AI. I'll read the definition for this one. The capacity to use technology confidently, critically, and responsibly. It includes critically evaluating online information, managing digital interactions, and applying AI tools ethically, alongside broader analytical and problem-solving skills. Now, in this webinar today, we'll be exploring, our role as English language teachers in developing our students' digital literacy skills. Okay, but I think that we do, and we should be, aiming to do that. And at the same time, as we can improve our students' English language proficiency skills, we can help them in these areas. The 5th area that I think we can do is I think that we can help our students prepare for and help tackle the climate crisis. So the fifth area I'm calling it green skills for climate action. Lots of people have lots of different terms for this. I could have had a much broader label for this category of really skills for tackling global challenges, but maybe the biggest global challenge that we have that we have to face as a as a world is climate change. Certainly, climate change is number one in terms of the biggest risks facing the planet in the future, certainly in the long-term future, 5, 10, 15 years ahead. So what's my definition here? The knowledge and behaviors that enable learners to respond to sustainability challenges. They include climate awareness, adaptability, and the capacity to use English for dialogue, innovation, and action towards a more sustainable and just future. Okay, so far I've mentioned 5 skills. As a quick recap and check that you're all still with me, let's see who can remember the 5 skills and put them in the chat box if you will. So these are just listing skills that I think we should be introducing into our English language teaching classrooms. English proficiency is our first job. We're English teachers. But we could be improving our students' digital literacy, improving our students' intercultural competence, good, improving our students' professional communication skills, negotiation skills, improving our students' green skills. All right, that's a lot, isn't it? We can't do all of this, maybe, and we have to decide what we want to focus on. What's our passion, or what's our expertise, or what are our students care most about, okay? Now, these are just the skills. We've got to move on to talk briefly about why and then how. So I hope you're with me. Let's move on. This was an argument, made by Rosalind Appleby. This is a fantastic short article in a really good collection of papers by the British Council called English Across the Fracture Lines. And you can see in this quote that I've taken, she's saying, I'll just read the bit in bold, all those involved in English language education need to consider how we might contribute to building a safer and more sustainable future. Yeah, what can we do? How can we play our part? So this should have been in the why, but it's coming. It's coming. Here we are. I'm going to go back to that. Why? Why are we going to integrate these 5 skills into ELT? Okay, why are we going to do that? Now, firstly, all of these skills, one of the things that we have as English teachers, I'll give you one argument, is that relatively speaking, we have a lot more freedom over our content than most subject teachers. Okay. So if you're teaching the second conditional, for example, that's the linguistic aim of your lesson. You've got this grammatical structure that you've got to teach. How you teach it and what material you use to teach that grammatical structure is often, you get a little bit of freedom with that. And with that freedom, that would mean that you could have a little bit more power yourself over choosing the content of your class. So you might decide to look at something around the environment, for example, or you could be talking about the risks of using AI to do your homework, or you could be talking about what it means to be a good negotiator. Okay, so we have relative freedom over the content of our classes. And if we have course books, I know many people are given course books that they have to follow, we can often adapt the course book or supplement the course book. So this flexibility really gives us a great opportunity to explore different areas or bring in different things. Things that, again, you're passionate about as a teacher, that your students are passionate about, okay? It says global reach here. This is just to make the point that English is taught all around the world. There are probably more people learning English than anything else. I mean, um, everybody is learning English. It's an international language right now. We have an enormous opportunity, especially in areas like tackling climate crisis, to make a big difference through integrating some of these important areas into our English language lessons. Let's have a second reason why. And I'm going to go a bit more specific now into the, trying to match the skills that I highlighted in the what skills with the why. So again, I said a little bit here around, intercultural competence and why I thought it was important. But just to re-emphasize some other reasons, I just said a second ago that English is an international language. It is often used between, let's say, non-native speakers. So this says English is rarely used with native speakers. Most communication happens across cultures. I think over 85% of communication in English is between two non-native English speakers. And interestingly, and this has been highlighted in a number of different reports, communication failures are largely not due to language issues, but due to differences in culture and behavioral norms. So I just want to repeat that because it's really important. Communication failures at work are largely not due to language issues, but to differences in culture and behavioral norms. And certainly, I can tell you, as somebody who lives in Indonesia, that when I have a miscommunication with somebody in Indonesia, it's often not language. It's not a language problem. It was a misunderstanding because of a different way of behaving or a different cultural expectation. So I might have understood the words perfectly, but actually what that person meant by those words in Indonesia was different from what I would mean by them in the UK. So it was a kind of a cultural misunderstanding. Okay. And this is really, really interesting. All right. Now, and I think that we need to spend a lot of time, exploring, um, cultural differences and cultural similarities with our students. Yes, you get my slides at the end of my talk, all of these points. Now, here we are. So professional communication skills. Why? Okay, the biggest reason is just probably to say, let's read the quote and then I'll emphasize it. Learners need the knowledge, skills, and attitude necessary to be competitive in the 21st century workforce, participate appropriately in an increasingly diverse society, use new technologies, and cope with rapidly changing workplaces. I think the biggest reason is about being competitive. Chia in her paper talks a lot about how developments in AI mean that basic simple jobs that are like memorization tasks or repetitive tasks which don't take much thinking or professional communication skills are going to be done by AI and are going to be done by robots. Whereas employers are looking for graduates who have these kind of analytical thinking skills, critical thinking skills, and these professional communication skills, and these kind of intercultural competence. So it's about employability increasingly, okay? Let's give you some reasons why you should be thinking about integrating digital literacy, including AI into your English language lessons. I'll look at the second bullet point first. Increasingly, not all, but increasingly, English language classrooms are digital spaces. Embedding AI literacy aligns with language practice, and it aligns language practice with real workplace expectations, is how I should have read that. Sorry. So I think we should be bringing digital exercises and activities into the classroom. And one of the reasons for that is because that is what we do outside the classroom in our own time, whether we're texting our friends or scrolling through social media, or applying for jobs online. But it also aligns with kind of workplace expectations. Most jobs these days are expecting people to work using a computer. The majority of the time they've got to send emails, they've got to critically analyze data, they've got to make decisions, they've got to have Zoom webinars like this. All right, so these are the kind of things that graduates need to do in order to get a job. It's kind of what most jobs look like these days. According to the World Economic Forum, AI, big data, and technology literacy are the top 3 fastest growing skills globally. All right. Bajaj made a good point in the chat, which I agree with. We'll come back and we'll talk about that in a bit, Bajaj. Okay. Last one was around, this is Chia making this point here again, emphasizing it's no longer sufficient to simply comprehend and memorize information. Our learners need to be able to analyze, evaluate, and infer while also collaborating with others to make decisions, innovate, and find solutions. And here we have learners need to analyze, question, and evaluate information in a world of fake news and AI-generated content. English lessons can integrate critical thinking. We can ask our students to compare sources, identify bias. We can debate issues. We can run projects and have students do problem-solving tasks, such as planning an event or creating a product. Tasks that encourage creativity and meaningful use of English. These activities develop learners' autonomy and real-world employability. All right, we're sort of stepping into examples here of how we do this. So far, all I've been trying to do, maybe in a bit of a long-winded, elaborate way, is tell you some skills that I think we should be integrating into our teaching and why. But really, and I should have mentioned the last one, the green skills for climate action. There you are. These are 2 of many arguments why we could introduce green skills into the English language classroom. I'll come back to that. But what I've been doing so far is talk about what skills and why. And now I'm going to talk about how. And then we're going to have a conversation, okay? Now, how do we do it? And how have I been doing it? I'll share some of my experience. I want to hear later from you about your experience. And maybe this is the key bit, okay? I don't think anybody listening so far probably disagrees with anything that I've said. But you're all thinking, how do I do this? How do I do this with my students? Right, ready? Number 1. And this is fundamentally important, okay? You can do it in all sorts of different ways, but basically I like to differentiate between teaching skills explicitly and implicitly. Now, if you've been an English teacher for a long time, you're familiar with these terms explicit and implicit with your teaching aims. If you're doing something explicitly, you might say to your students, Today we're going to have a lesson on negotiation skills. We're going to focus on what it means to be good at collaborating. Okay, so I'm explicit to my students and in the classroom around the focus of the presence of this soft skill in my lesson. Uh, you could be using a kind of, as it says here, a content and language integrated learning style. Design a lesson where the content is the skill itself. All right, or you're doing it implicitly. So, for example, if you ask your students to do a task which requires them to collaborate in a group, to negotiate as a group in order to reach a decision, they are inherently going to be developing their collaboration skills in English, their negotiation skills in English. You might not tell them that, they might think that this is an English lesson and it's focused on some vocabulary items or a grammatical structure, and it is possibly focused on those grammatical items or those vocabulary items or grammatical structures. But you also know, as a teacher, that one of the additional benefits of this activity is that your students are in a group negotiating, so then they are going to be improving their negotiation skills. And I think that's really important to think about, okay? Because for many of you, you might have already been teaching and developing many of these skills through your English lessons, maybe without even realizing it, okay? Because maybe it wasn't given to you as a curriculum aim by your head of department or by the national curriculum, okay? Increasingly, though, it is going to be, which is why maybe some of you are here today. So we can do it explicitly or implicitly. Now, just on that, I've been throwing around some terms like ESP and CLIL. If you're not familiar with these terms, then I've put in, actually this slide is probably the best one, I think, for you to really think about. Generally speaking, and I think this is quite useful, at this end of the kind of this spectrum or this continuum, English as a foreign language, in these lessons, we're really focusing on English language, not the kind of the content or the subject. The content of the subject is flexible, is not a core aim. We're not expecting students here to get, more knowledgeable about a particular topic. Whereas over here on this kind of end of the continuum, where you've got English as a medium of instruction or immersion, really the focus of here is on the subject itself. And we happen to be teaching that subject in English. So English is almost in the background at that end of the spectrum. And some of the areas that I've been talking about in the middle are where you have things like content and language integrated learning, where you might have a dual focus. So you might say today, primarily we're going to have a lesson about whatever subject you like, about travel with it and travel vocabulary in English, but also, we might have some additional areas of focus. So we might have a debate, and I want you to, about travel, about the most environmentally friendly ways to travel, and then we could be improving our debating skills. So these terms are useful, I agree. Somebody's put in the chat. Now, so we had explicit and implicit language teaching, and then we can use some of these terms to think about what you're doing yourself in the classroom, okay? So you can bear that in mind. Now, there's a lot of terminology that I've thrown in here. And again, you'll have to go back to this article by Will Baker to truly understand it. Remember, I had those slides earlier. But what those acronyms mean, move, it's your homework is to go and read. What does move beyond ICC to TC and TA mean? So ICC was this international communicative competence, and TC and TA were, I think, transnational competence or transnational awareness, transcultural awareness. There we are, transcultural competence, transcultural awareness. But I'll read the definition below, okay? Focus on building trust and relationships across cultures, not stereotypes. Traditional ICC often reduced cultures to national differences. Today's world requires transcultural competence and transcultural awareness. Okay, ICC, Samar, is was an old term. Maybe, this area has been, it's not a, this is not a new area. People have been talking about teaching communicative competence for a long time. And I think this is just one of the original older terms that was used. And but the reason I'm flagging it up, and I'm flagging it up almost as a warning. Okay, there's a kind of what to do and what not to do. When intercultural competence has been brought in to English language teaching, quite often what it has led to is teachers talking, okay, how are people in Japan different from people in Russia, different from people who are in America, or different from people in Indonesia, right? They're kind of reinforcing stereotypes and saying how we are different from each other. Like English men have a bowler hat and an umbrella and a briefcase, and we wear a suit and we go to work, and people in Japan all eat sushi, okay? Now, and then they'll tick a box to say that I've done intercultural competence. Okay. This is not very helpful. All right. These days, although it can be useful to have an understanding of different culture, of course, we need to go beyond that. And I think what's really important is to say that as well as our differences, we have probably more in common. There's a phrase actually. Somebody said, there is more, we have more in common than that which divides us. And I hope that you really emphasize to your students the importance of building relationships and finding things that they have in common with people from other countries. And this is what I'm getting to. So here's an example task. Because this is a relationship building activity. It's aimed at teenagers. It's called speed networking. And in this task, students have 3-minute conversations with different people. And in those 3 minutes, they have to find something in common with somebody else that they were talking to. And at the end, the students talk about, who did you connect with most? So, in your speed networking, I would spend 3 minutes talking to this person, then go and talk to another person, then go and talk to another person. And at the end of that, I might say, well, I met this guy from Japan who studied English language teaching in Barcelona, like me. And then he also likes Liverpool Football Club, like me. So, he might be from Japan, but we have so much in common. So I think that this is really an important part of helping students build their intercultural competence. And how do you do that? How do you find things in common? You have to be good. You have to develop your active listening skills, asking questions. So it links very closely to English language teaching. There's this, I stepped outside sometimes of ELT to other places to find some of the content for my training. So this is, for example, from a This wasn't from an ELT course book. This was from a handbook on humanitarian negotiation. And in this handbook, this is Alam Malouf, and he had a definition around, for him, he talked about horizontal culture and vertical culture. And your horizontal culture is the culture that you have inherited. Sorry, the culture that you have acquired through your life experiences, whereas your inherited culture is kind of the kind of communities that you're born into. And I think that we need to understand that people, even if they might come from a particular country and a particular community, so they might be a Muslim Indonesian because that's what they were born into. They're going to have an enormous amount of different things about them as an individual because of their life and their life experiences. And we will only be able to find out about those acquired cultural, individual things by asking questions and listening. So, any tasks that we can do in the English language classroom that can help students be better at that, I think are really important. I've given you some other tasks for like to do there, and I've given you examples of how you could do this with young learners, with teenagers, with university students, with adults in business English, with people at different abilities. So there are these are more ways to do it, if you like, because this part of my presentation is on how do you teach or bring in things around intercultural competence into the classroom. But we've got to move on because we're going to have a Q&A today. And I want to talk a little bit around professional communication skills. Okay. Now, at the beginning of this how section, I did say that we could do it explicitly or implicitly. And I think you're already doing it implicitly because of the types of activities that English teachers use in the classroom. I think it's much less common for these types of skills to be taught explicitly. And one of the reasons for that is understandably that you and teachers like you might lack some of the confidence to talk with authority about these skills as a skill area, right? You might be very confident about talking about grammatical structures and linguistics because that's what you've studied and that's what you're familiar with. You're not familiar with necessarily negotiation strategies and techniques. So if you do want to teach these skills explicitly, then I've said quite bluntly maybe that you need to train yourself. You do need to spend some time getting better yourself at these areas so that you could then pass on your knowledge to your learners. I want to say on a positive side that you already have these skills because English teachers are very good at these things. So you're already doing it, but you've got to reflect and say, well, what am I doing well? So teachers should, in my opinion, this is my view now, deepen their own knowledge of professional communication skills like negotiation, presentation skills, business writing, effective writing. Okay. And all of the stuff we do in the classroom, it already lends itself to these areas. Okay, so we're already doing pair work and group work and projects. We already do role plays and simulations. So we already kind of have the right activities, the infrastructure in the lesson, because students are already doing this. PSC is professional communication skills. I just couldn't fit it all on this slide. I was trying to get it all on one side. You'll see later on. Now, we're going to do a quick activity together, as I've been talking a lot. I'm going to show you, that's actually a nice, gentle Introduction to Negotiation Skills that you could read. It's a book by Roger Fisher and William Ury. They set up a center at Harvard University called Project on Negotiation, which is still the world's kind of top school for learning about negotiation skills. All right, let's just do an activity. As you can see, and you could use this with your students, maybe if you have teenagers or young professionals. Look at that graphic, okay? I'm going to call it a graphic. What you can see in this graphic is you can see cooperativeness on the bottom axis and assertiveness on the kind of vertical axis or on the left-hand side, okay? So you could be unassertive, unassertive, uncooperative, and cooperative. And then we've got 5 different boxes: avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and collaborating. I'm going to give you a scenario, and based on the scenario, I want you to decide what's your natural behavior, okay? So the scenario is you are going to the cinema with you're going to the cinema with somebody, with friends, with family, and you're trying to decide what to see at the cinema. I want you to tell me in the box, what would your behavior be? Now, if you're competitive, you will be trying to convince everybody to see what you want to see at the cinema. And if you're accommodating, then maybe you have an opinion, but you're just going to let other people decide. And you will go along with whatever other people decide. And if you're compromising, you might be the type of person who says, okay, we'll see your film this week, and next week I choose. This week you choose, next week I choose. So just tell me in the chat box, what's in that scenario, what are you? What would collaborating mean? Collaborating must mean that we would talk about all of the films at the cinema, talk about all of the types of films that we like, and try to identify the film that we would both enjoy the most. All right. Now, there's no right or wrong answer, okay? But we all have a natural negotiation style outside of work and at work. And these are the types of activities that you can do, where you start to reflect on your own behavior. And then you could start to bring in language. What type of language would you use if you were being, more accommodating? What type of language do people use when they are trying to collaborate? You could teach your students some phrases and expressions. You could even role play a scenario, and you could ask students to try to be the opposite of their natural tendency. Yeah. So you can see how you could easily bring in some English language activities or exercises to this, whilst at the same time, your students would remember this graphic, and they might remember their own self-reflection. You can explore this in a lot more detail. I'm really just brushing the surface. It's a very exciting area, in my view, to think about things like negotiation skills as a skill and how you can, identify your own strengths and weaknesses and improve. And language is a key part of it, by the way. Obviously, when you are negotiating in English. Okay, let's keep going because I'm aware of time. I wanted to give you an example. Well, I said keep going. I'm going to show you me teaching negotiation skills quite a long time ago now, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So here's a picture of me teaching negotiation skills. And one of the other things I wanted to say, this was in Turkey at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Where am I? Can you see me? You can't see me because, as you can see from the heading, as an English teacher in my career, I gradually moved from being a very teacher-centered teacher to being, or trying to be, a more learner-centered teacher and to try to be more of what I would call a facilitator of learning, to try to create the right environment for students to use English. And I would then monitor and not constantly correct or interrupt. I would monitor them. So here are my students engaged in an activity, collaborating, doing something together. And I'm taking the photograph. That's why you can't see me. It does look a little bit like me near the whiteboard, Johannes, but I'm not. You'll see me at the end. I'll prove it's me. It's not me near the whiteboard. Okay, everyone's. I'm taking the picture, but you'll see me in a minute. Right. Here is another same classroom. These are my students, okay? Again, junior diplomats. I was training them, how to negotiate. This was a bilateral negotiation. I had given them a scenario. They had prepared, and this is actually not a photograph. This is a screenshot from a recording because I was recording the negotiation. And then later on the television at the back, we would watch the recording. And then they would reflect and they would talk about their performance, their communicative performance, their linguistic performance. And I would give them feedback on their language skills, but also feedback on their negotiation and on their body language and on other aspects of communication. So, this is an example of how you can use technology, you can do tasks, and we always got good feedback on this course because this course was using ELT methodology. It was very engaging for the students. It was very participatory, if you like. Most of their training was very passive lectures from senior diplomats. For months and months and months, they would be lectured. But for 2 weeks, they got to practice, So they all said that they developed, um, a lot, and gained an enormous amount through our short course. I was there. And also I was with my colleague Phil. Here's Phil. We are sometimes, as teachers, we've got to bring the students back to give feedback. As you can see, here's Phil giving feedback to her group. And that's just me to prove that I was in Turkey with my students. Right. So think of yourself as a facilitator, I think, setting up tasks, and then you can monitor them for both their language performance and possibly for their, other areas. They did not think that they were attending, by the way, an English language course for these 2 weeks. They were attending a course on negotiation skills, on presentation skills, on diplomatic writing. Okay. Now, where are we? I've got a lot of slides, haven't I? Chia in her paper has some excellent recommendations, some of which I've mentioned. I'm not going to go through these in more detail. I'll just be encouraging you. If you Google this, I'm sorry I don't have a hyperlink, but if you Google it, it's free and you can find it. And it's not very long, it's very good. I think she's got a book coming, so look out for that. And she's saying here, this was a nice thing. Look, she's saying English teaching professionals sometimes express feelings of insecurity about their level of knowledge of soft skills. And I would say, yes, go and study and develop your knowledge of soft skills. But also, as she says here, recognize it is important to realize that these are skills that we, because we're all English teachers, may well already possess. Okay. You, as English teachers, are almost certainly very good at all of these types of skills that your students need in order to succeed in the real world. Digital. I'm running out of time. How can we use AI? How can we use AI? I'm just thinking about, okay, I want to give you everything. So I'm going to be 10 more minutes max, okay, I promise, and then we will have our Q&A, okay? So I'm sure all of you are using ChatGPT or Grok or Google Gemini. And somebody's just said AI is great to give feedback. It is, I think, and it can give you very personalized, detailed, tailored feedback. But it does very much depend on making sure that your AI, that your ChatGPT is using the assessment criteria that you want it to. You need to train your AI. So for example, you could give your AI the assessment criteria for IELTS, and then you could give it some writing samples and ask ChatGPT to, tell you according to the IELTS publicly available band descriptors and assessment criteria. How would you, evaluate my level of writing, and what recommendations would you have for me to improve and get a higher band score? Now that's about IELTS, so I'm leaning back towards English proficiency. We can also get AI to give us feedback on our professional communication skills. So I could talk to AI these days about a negotiation that I had, maybe that went badly, um, and ask for some sort of observations and some advice and some recommendations from AI. We're getting lots of okay, shouldn't we be careful with the use of AI? After all, it is artificial, which sometimes doesn't work in our environment. One of the things I have to say, and rightly say, I think that the benefits of AI at the moment are fantastic, but there are all sorts of um, warnings and caveats that we need to be aware of, especially as teachers, when giving advice to our students, that we need to make sure that AI is not a replacement for human interaction, that AI is a tool, and AI can sometimes make mistakes and get things wrong, and show that to our students, which is part of this digital literacy, you know. And it's just that you need to be able to use these fantastic digital tools critically. You need to have those kind of critical thinking skills, those analytical skills, in order to use these innovations efficiently and effectively. As it says here, highlight critical digital skills, evaluating online sources, responsible use of AI. Okay. Here. AI is reshaping education. It's offering tools for practice. You can talk to your computer now, feedback, even simulation. Teachers can use AI to generate role plays, provide even pronunciation feedback. We can simulate intercultural interactions. You could get your AI to be a Japanese businessman or an Indonesian tourist. The focus must remain on AI as a support tool. Teachers still guide reflection, correct errors, and ensure responsible use. I think spending some time with your students talking about the opportunities, but also the risks, is really, really important. AI provides opportunities, yeah, but it should never replace human judgment and empathy. Now, I've put some example again here. We have some example ways in which ChatGPT could help you build your soft skills or help your learners build their soft skills. But I am aware of time, so I'm going to let you have them as a slide and look at them in a little bit more use later. If you've been attending English school webinars regularly, I'm sure you would have had a webinar with Joe Dale. but he's my guru when it comes to using technology in English language teaching. And he has a Facebook group called Language Teaching with AI with now over 6,000 members. And Joe is very generous in sharing often the most interesting and innovative websites and tools which you can play around with. And also he flags up obviously the risks with those as well. And that is Fajar in here. You're on the very left, are you? Is that you? Okay, Fajar. Fajar's the guru in Indonesia, by the way. I don't know if Fajar has his own group yet. We can put it in the chat if he does. So Joe's from the UK. A lot of people, there's a group in Indonesia, by the way, called ITEL, which is Indonesia Technology Enhanced Language Learning. Again, the president's Pat Jati. Join ITEL if you want to. All right, time. Green skills. We're going to finish with this and then we'll have our Q&A. Similar, in a similar way to professional communication skills, really, if you want to introduce climate and sustainability themes into your teaching confidently, then I would argue that it is worth spending some time to develop your own climate and environmental literacy. You need to sort of feel a little bit more confident in talking about things like there's a lot of terminology in this area. We talk about mitigation and adaptation. What do these terms mean? Yeah? Mitigation is things that we can do to reduce the harmful emissions into the atmosphere, to kind of mitigate against those kind of the rise of CO2, to try to keep the temperature levels from rising too much. And adaptation, I mean, it's easier to kind of get to grasp with, is around adapting to a different world or a different environment. And most experts agree that we are rapidly entering a new era where large parts of the world are going to be significantly impacted by the effects of climate change, and people will need to adapt to these kind of new realities. And that will mean new ways of working, new jobs, new ways of living. Now, one of the things I wanted to say here, let's look at this. There's an enormous amount. This is a whole webinar by itself. But in one bullet point, if you do introduce environmental issues into your English teaching, and I hope that you do, the problem has been often, up until now, that when it has been introduced, it's often, in ways which are disengaging to learners. So they would have their climate change lecture where they would hear about global warming and melting ice caps, and there might be a picture of a polar bear. And certainly for students here in Indonesia, that's very, very far away from people's reality. Okay, so when you talk about the environment and climate issues, the idea or the recommended advice to make it more engaging is to localize it, to think about environmental issues where you live, in your country, in your community, to humanize it, to think about the impact it is having on people, people like you, and to think about not only the worrying but real future impacts, but often, there's great things that are being done. There are reasons to be hopeful. There are solutions to these problems. Okay, and that will be more inspiring and more engaging for your students, maybe more uplifting to talk about environmental action than to be doom and gloom and to add to what is called a real problem around climate anxiety. Okay, if you want to go all in, then I hope that you will explore this area that is called climate justice and talk about that. So if you have more advanced level students, this is a really interesting area and a very important area to talk about, to raise their knowledge of, and their ability to communicate in English around these kind of issues. All right, this was a video that I worked on when I was leading this area for the British Council, and I wanted to show you, although we've run out of time now, this was a video. You can still find this if you search the British Council's Teaching English website. But with this, it's a kind of traditional video that you can find a lot of ELT course books. This video came with a kind of exercise handout for students, kind of before you watch this video, do these exercises, answer these questions, then watch the video. Then after you watch the video, here are some more questions and some exercises. Some of the questions, the pre-watching and the post-watching, had a language aim and a language focus. Some of the questions were around the environment and around initiatives in schools to make the school more climate or environmentally responsible. And you can see how, whether that was an explicit or an implicit lesson, that students are both learning English and they are, learning a little bit more about climate action. Okay. Q&A. I also wanted to show you, if I can, I'm quite excited. If I stop sharing for a minute, you're just going to see my face, I think. And then I wanted to highlight something else that you're going to get. I hope. One second. You can start putting your questions in the chat box. I'm going to put something on the screen. Here we go. Okay, and then I go back to share screen. Haha! So everything I've just told you, more or less everything I've just told you, I managed to put into one slide, which I think you can see now. So this will be your takeaway, one pager. These are kind of the main points that I wanted to make. And if I can, I might put it together a reference list for you as well, perhaps with some hyperlinks. And I'll make sure that you get that by email. If you want my slides now, so this one pager and my reference link, this one page I don't think you get, but I'll email it to you. And now I'm just going to stop showing that because I want to show you my slides and say thank you very much for coming in case anybody needs to leave. And then we will have a chat. So again, I think if I put this one up, sorry that the bit.ly link, I didn't change the ending, so it's got a 4PE anyway. Most of you will be able to use the QR code, and I think Alif will put into the chat box the bit.ly link code. I'm going to open the chat box. I don't think we have a Q&A box today. Lots of people saying thank you. Do you have any questions? I'm still here. Very happy to answer any questions. If you have to go, you have to go. Thank you very much for coming for today's webinar. And many thanks to English Score for hosting and organizing this session. Again, English is the #1 skill, and it's vitally important that you and your students know their level of English to measure their progress. So they're CEF score. Okay, I've not been able to understand what is called green school, particularly on, would you please provide some example activities? Yes, okay. That was a video, Pawanti. It was just a video which was actually a number of different schools. They entered a competition that I ran. The competition was make a video about climate action project in your school. And then what we did is we selected the best videos from around the world and we edited them into one video. So that was a compilation of the best climate action projects in schools from around the world. And then what we did is we, as English language teachers and trainers, we created an English lesson, a traditional English lesson, where that video was at the heart of the lesson. So before students watched the video, they had some activities and some exercises to complete. Some of those were around English language related to the video. Then they would watch the video, and then there were some additional tasks for them after watching the video. But the reason I highlighted it is that because, well, is through that approach, students would both be improving their English language skills and their knowledge and awareness of kind of some climate issues, and possibly in that case being inspired by some great projects happening in schools around the world. Okay, some other questions. Thank you very much, everybody. Your question is further up, David. I'm going to go back. I'm going to look for it. David, okay, here we are. Okay, yeah, the issue is that school rules and classrooms must accommodate the use of technology. In my previous school, phones were banned and the use of AI was strictly prohibited. Yeah, okay, it's a big debate. We can have a whole webinar about whether or not mobile phones and technology and AI should be in the classroom or should not be in the classroom. And I think it depends on a wide variety of factors, depending on, sort of the age of the students. I do think that technology can be both, it can have real negative impacts on education in school, but it can also be fantastic when it's used well. And I think there is a kind of challenge that is being faced at the moment in individual schools and at a national level sometimes, that there is, because for precisely that reason, there is this ongoing debate, that it both has negative impacts and also we know that students have got to graduate with these kind of digital skills. So if you take away the phones and the computers completely, then we're preventing students from developing those skills. It's all about finding the right balance, isn't it? And making sure that the use is targeted, sensible, directed. I think certainly you can some schools might ban the use of handheld devices, which is maybe certainly the biggest sort of area of contention at the moment. I think the use by the teacher at the front of the room using a computer is much less controversial. And so guided work with the teacher, doing things around, like, let's say, comparing sources and looking, that kind of, you can do a lot as a group, is what I'm saying, with the teacher in terms of group work while still developing digital literacies. And I would also say I'm a big fan of it not necessarily being teacher-centered. There might just be one computer, but let students And again, you still be the facilitator in the back of the room. They take over the main computer and the projector. They present, they share their own, they're probably more digitally literate than you, and they show and teach each other. Uh, but whilst you're watching and you're guiding everything. I got, how much time have I got? A few minutes. That was a rambling answer, David. What else have people put into the chat? I wonder where you teach. Okay, so somebody else is talking to David about that issue. There's a big discussion happening. Okay. Fajar saying we really need to move beyond teaching language as an isolated skill. Yeah, I agree with that. And then we have, so what's a question? You don't get a code anymore, Joy, for a certificate. You're going to get sent a certificate by email. At least I hope you will. I'm pretty sure you will. We still have quite a few people here. You got my QR code. Stay here and ask me questions if you want to. I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a bonus. For people who've stayed for a long time, I want to read something. Do you mind if I read something? Yeah, we've got time and then I'll finish on time. I'm going to stop sharing that for a minute. I'm going to share, go back and share something though. Let's bring that up. I want to share these. I think a lot of people might run away when they see the density of the slides coming. Thumbnails. I want to go to this article by Will Baker and just go through it with you because it's really, really good. Get rid of the thumbnail. Can you see that? I think you can see that. Somebody tell me if you can see this. Yeah, all right. I mean, it's really bad practice for me to read, right? But just have a read of this. I really like this. Here we go. At present, the extent to which international communicative competence or international communicative awareness or other intercultural elements are incorporated into ELT classroom practices is debatable. True, right? Culture and the intercultural are often tacked on as a fifth skill. That was said by Cramps in 1993. I don't think much has changed. To be assessed only when other aspects of language and communication have been covered. Now, he goes on to say, evidence suggests that teachers typically fail to teach culture or international communication in a systematic or in-depth way. This is not surprising given the restricted time and resources many English language teachers face, and that few assessments include aspects of intercultural communication, right? So we're limited in terms of time, and there aren't really exams. Most exams don't test your intercultural communication skills. So if you're not tested, it's another reason why it maybe isn't going to be given a priority. Additionally, teaching materials frequently cover culture and the intercultural in a simplistic and stereotyped manner. 100%. I talked about this earlier. Don't do it. Or if you do it, go way beyond the kind of cultural stereotypes. And remember to talk about people as individuals. Furthermore, intercultural dimensions are often not part of pre-service teacher education. So we don't learn how to do it when we're training to become teachers, right? So these are all the reasons why it's not there. Now I'm going to finish with a very dense but really important, like the conclusion of Will Baker's paper. Okay, bear with me, it's worth it. There are now decades worth of research and theory suggesting a wide variety of approaches to applying intercultural communication in language classrooms. So Baker's got his own paper on that, and there are some others, okay? Shared features of these approaches include expanding communicative competence to incorporate international communicative competence and international communicative awareness, international, right? And linked to this, replacing the native speaker with an intercultural speaker or citizen model as more appropriate and achievable for L2 learners. There's this whole point here about getting rid of native speaker as an idealized model for learners, which is another, we could talk about that for a long time. Intercultural language education also involves a critical approach to language, culture, and identity that encourages learners to question taken for granted assumptions about national cultures, identity, languages, and connections between them. In relation to English, rather than just Anglophone varieties and cultures, this entails recognizing its global role as a multilingua franca for intercultural and transcultural communication in diverse cultural settings. This also means centering on the cultures and the related needs and goals of local teachers and learners rather than imposing external teaching approaches and materials. Lastly, last paragraph, key one, this is it, and I got 1 minute. Intercultural communication is increasingly, this is good, part of in-service teacher education, particularly at postgraduate levels in university courses. I know there are some experts in Indonesia who work at BRIN. This is an Indonesian Center for Science and Research. Intercultural communication is also more frequently appearing in language teaching policy documents in diverse settings, including the United States, Europe, and Southeast and East Asia. All these factors combined underscore the growing importance of intercultural communication in English language teaching and the need to incorporate it more deeply and systematically into teacher education, teaching materials, classroom practice, and assessment. And I hope today, through this webinar, I have contributed a tiny bit in supporting that vision. Okay, my time is up. I'll stop sharing. You get all of that if you download the slides, which I will put back up now. Where are they? And I'll leave them up, and I'll wish you a fabulous day, whatever it is you're doing. And it's Thursday. Yeah, there you go. There's the slides again. Thanks a lot. Thanks, David. Thanks, Marissa. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Wouter. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Terima kasih banyak semua to Indonesians. And yeah, I hope to see you again. Have a great day. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. And goodbye. Take care. Thank you very much.